Hello everybody, it's Walter, your favorite historian, educator, professor, social studies extraordinaire, and blue-collar scholar. Today's date is December 27th, 2025, and this video is entitled Racial Segregation in the Northern United States. Now, everybody who has read anything about American history, even for 5 minutes, is quite familiar with the rampant, unmistakable, clear racial discrimination that existed in the American South all the way roughly from the 1880s until the 1960s. Okay, what I mean by that is clear racial segregation, colored only, white only signs, restricted access to facilities of all sorts based on your race, colored and white only drinking fountains, bathrooms, seating at restaurants, in businesses, government facilities, housing, you name it, it was there. Okay, but what is less commonly known is the racial segregation that existed in the northern United States in the same time period, and even earlier, as a matter of fact. Okay, now the North is often portrayed as a place that was a safe refuge for Black Americans, a place that didn't have racial segregation, a place that didn't have racial discrimination. After all, in the North, Blacks certainly had better economic opportunities with respect to jobs. Okay, Black people could typically have more buying power, greater access to purchase homes and other type of real property up there, better schools. Okay, the ability to vote typically without intimidation and terror. Okay, overall, generally, the North was a better place for Black Americans than the South during this time period. However, that did not mean for one single second that the North was heaven on earth for Black Americans. Quite the opposite, in fact. In the North, segregation absolutely, positively existed. In the great cities of New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Detroit, and a litany of others, Los Angeles, San Diego, Seattle, okay, just pointing out some of the more famous northern cities, Cincinnati, okay, Toledo, you name it. There was racial discrimination and racial segregation, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the primary difference in the North versus the South was that racial segregation in the South, more often than not, and absolutely, unmistakably so, was required by law, either at the state level or at the municipal level. Okay? In the North, segregation tended to be based more on custom and individual practices rather than being mandated by a city ordinance or by a state statute or constitutional provision. That is the primary difference. In places, let's just take like New York City, for example, African Americans were routinely discriminated against and not allowed to be patrons at certain clubs, sit in certain restaurants and eat, stay at certain hotels, buy property in certain areas. Okay, let me highlight the property for a second. Property sales were often restricted to whites using what were known as racially restrictive housing covenants, informal agreements between homeowners, okay, whereby they would not sell their property to a Black person or an Asian person or a Jewish person. Okay, nobody but a white person could buy it. Okay, you saw segregation in education, segregation in the commercial sector. All right, again, this was done in the North more so by custom and individual practice rather than being mandated by law. But at the end of the day, segregation is segregation. And African Americans traveling in the northern states just had to be just as aware of that as if they were traveling in the southern states. Now, with that in mind, racial segregation in the North tended to be more complicated than in the South because of that very reason. In the South, again, black Americans knew right out the gate where they could go, where they could not go, where they better not dare think of going. Okay? You knew right there because you saw it right on the front door. Colored only, white only. Bathrooms, drinking fountains, hotels, everything else. You name it. All right? I don't even have to roughly break that down for you. Okay? In train stations, colored only and white only sections. Restaurants. Okay? You name it. It was everywhere, ubiquitous throughout the American South. Black American traveling to the South from the North, instantly from the moment they got off that train, would probably be greeted with colored only, white only signs, especially in the terminal itself. And then once they got out of there, they saw it everywhere. Okay? When they went to a restaurant, colored only, white only. Okay? Water fountain, again, colored only, white only. All of that. You saw it everywhere in the American South. But in the North, that typically did not exist. And so black Americans would often try to patronize establishments and be embarrassed when they tried to sit down. Oh, we don't serve coloreds here. Sorry, you have to go to the place next door. Or when they tried to go to a place like the Cotton Club. All right? Absolutely not. We don't accept coloreds as patrons here in the Cotton Club. Okay? Now, blacks could perform there, but you could not sit down there and have a drink. No sir, no ma'am. Okay? You try to buy a house in the wrong neighborhood, you'll probably be run out by a not so friendly mob. Okay? Segregation in the North was absolutely there. There were many northern cities in the famous Green Book published during that time period that pointed out safe spaces for African American travelers, restaurants, hotels, places of leisure, and all of that. Believe me, northern cities and southern cities. Okay, so black travelers had to be aware of all of that no matter where they went in America. Okay, and arguably their experience in some ways might have been better in the South than in the North, because at least in the South they knew what time it was right out the gate. They knew what was up. In the North, you quite often, like I said, end up being embarrassed because you try to go in a place and they tell you we don't serve coloreds here. Okay? My grandmother, who was born in 1929, okay, of course, grew up in Baltimore in the 1930s and 40s. She herself always used to tell me when I was a little boy that she preferred the southern variety of segregation because at least down there, you knew where you stood from the get-go. You knew where you could go, where you could not go, and where you'd be crazy to even try to go. Whereas traveling throughout many northern cities, you ended up being embarrassed trying to go in many different places or trying to engage in various transactions, okay? So understand, ladies and gentlemen, that racial segregation was not hardly just a southern phenomenon in the United States. It existed throughout the American Republic, okay? It's quite often just as viciously in the North as it did in the South, okay? The primary upper hand that the North had for African Americans during the Jim Crow period was the fact that in the North, they had better employment opportunities. You know, they typically had better abilities to buy property, better so than in the South, where the racial zoning restrictions on buying property for blacks was everywhere, okay? That blacks had better access to education in the North, of course, and also, last but not least, cannot overlook it, blacks in the North could typically vote without worrying about being intimidated, harassed, or killed, okay? So that's my sum, and I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on it, and I hope you learned a little thing or two today about racial segregation in the northern United States in the Jim Crow period. So leave them in the comments down below, and we can have a lot of peaceful, intellectual discussion on this subject. Take care of yourself, stay safe out there, and I will talk to you at the next video. Professor Shelton, the Blue Collar Scholar, out.